Here we are at our 6th session for the conference, and the topic will be David's palace and the transition to Solomon. And I told you I did a lot of work on the palace of David, so I'm going to share some of that with you. I can't share it all because time, as I always say, time is my greatest enemy, apart from the evil one.
Uh-huh.
And of course, you would probably say back to me, well, Dr. P, didn't God make time? Well, you're taking it too far, but you're probably right anyway. All right, so here's where we start. David's rest from his enemies. Remember, we were looking just a moment ago at David's temporary rest for the timing of the receiving of the moving of the ark into Jerusalem and the receiving of the Davidic covenant. So that's because God brings about a temporary rest. And then after that temporary rest, David is right back to the campaign trail. And he's out of Dodge. And by the way, this is another reason why the monumental architecture of David's day is very limited in Jerusalem. Because he's gone all the time. A professor who came and visited us at the University of Toronto, he actually teaches at the University of Chicago, which is one of the top in the world in his field. Dr. Sloan, he came and talked to us, and one of the things he talked about, he believes in a literal Davidic kingdom, which is very rare, among top secular scholars, extremely rare. And he addressed the issue of why there's so little monumental architecture for David's reign, and he said, listen, come on, David is like Charlemagne. He's not home knitting all the time. He's on the road, going from place to place, conquering, fighting, beating, besieging, gaining, right? That's what he's doing all the time. So he doesn't have time to spend on, feed me some more grapes while I'm thinking about what to do. Well, maybe we could build this over here, and we could build that over there, and we could build this. He's not about that. He's about God's work. What was God's work for him? Expanding the kingdom. So what do? We conquer territory that's part of the divinely ordained borders of the promised land. I mean, it's not the most pleasant work. It's not, it comes with a cost, which we just saw, right? He can't build the temple, but it has to be done. So he goes out on campaign. He takes out a lot of players, Moab and the Moabites and the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Arameans and Syrians and the Philistines again. It's, opportunity number 2 with the Philistines. So there are the initial Philistine wars and the later Philistine wars. So he finishes the later. All that now is done. So we've just, in 2 minutes here, we've blown through a lot of time in history. And we're not getting into the details of that. But, you can go back and study that in the text. It's there, trust me. But now we come to the point where David has rest. And once he has rest, he is able to focus on monumental architecture in Jerusalem in his waning days. And that concentrates on his palace. That, again, becomes the dynastic palace. Is he building it for himself? Yes and no. He's hardly going to enjoy it because he's just going to be an old guy. Probably can barely see it. But his successors would be able to use it. So the rest comes probably around 980 BC. And why is that date chosen? Well, there's a long story, and I'm not going to get into it all. It's all going to be in my article. You can read my article when it comes out. But what I argue in there, with the help of a friend who is really a phenomenal chronologist, Roger Young, I have a section on Hiram. Do you remember Hiram being called the man who helps David build the palace? He's the king of Tyre, Phoenician city. Remember, they're Canaanites, even though they're technically, as we divide things, outside of the border of Canaan. They're on the coast. They're these mariners, so they sail. They're boat people, I guess you could call them, maybe, in a different sense. And so he calls out calls up, rings up Hiram, and Hiram sends lots of people, lots of materials, including cedars of Lebanon, which you probably know about. They're floated down and added to the building project, or will be added to the building project. So, and of course, David's doing two things. He's building a palace for himself, and he's preparing for Solomon's building of the temple. So he's giving Solomon a huge boost on things. And of course, the temple takes so long to build anyway, it's like without this boost, it would have been another, whatever, X amount of years. So it's a lot of work, but Hiram does the help, is the helper for David, because they're used to building tripartite buildings, including temples for gods. Pagan gods, well, yeah, welcome to the world. But it's still the same kind of design. So they borrow that same tripartite temple design in building the temple for God in Jerusalem. Yes, God gives specifications, but it's the same architectural design as all the other gods get, or if you prefer, the non-gods get. So you have to swallow that pill. That's just the way it goes. But we know from chronology, historical events that are dateable, we know from chronology that Hiram doesn't rise onto the throne until 980 BC. And that's verifiable in all kinds of ancient sources. Okay? So it's pretty cut and dry. You can't get around this. You can't with integrity doubt that date. It's right. And this is another reason why, and my chronologer friend Roger Young would say this is the main reason why. I disagree with him on that, but he would say it's the main reason. But I would say it's a reason why David's building of the dynastic palace doesn't happen early in his reign, because Hiram's got to help him. And that can only start after 980. But David gets on the throne in 1002. So that's 22 years after he's on the throne in Jerusalem that he's even capable of having that palace built. Right? So that's an issue. You can't sweep it under the rug. It's really cut and dry. Look at the details in my article that will come out, and you'll know, okay, yeah, that's pretty heavy. You can't with integrity get around that. So, 980 BC, he gains rest around, this isn't an exact year, it's around 980 BC, okay? So I'd agree that this isn't hard and fast, but by this time, he gains rest from his enemies. And look at this. So, and again, I haven't included the wars. I could include the war here, but I kind of ran out of space, and I want to keep this big for you to see. So 979 and 972, that's the construction of the dynastic palace. That goes first. Then, and these are approximate, and these are what's the term? Can't think of it, so I'll say these are logical year numbers here, the dating. 972 to 969. So these are my numbers. These are Andrew Steinman's numbers, 972 to 969, for the preparations for God's temple. I agree with him. I believe that the construction of the dynastic palace would have bled right into the preparations for God's temple, because you've got these people in the thousands who are working on the very same kinds of things. So what are you going to do? Send them home, right? Send them back to their countries where they came from, or their homes, and wait some period of time and then try to reassemble a new crew? No, I think it's the very same crew. Who's the crew? That's just it. Now, part of them are from Tyre, but who else would be part of this? You've got to have a lot of slaves, right? The Tyrians are the brain power. There may be there's at least some manpower coming, but where are you going to get the real manpower? Well, what just happened in this window of time that I don't have represented here? What does David do? Conquers. And when you conquer, what do you get? Slaves. So the slaves come and they do the work, because now you're done fighting. So they construct the dynastic palace, and David says, while we have the work crew here, let's roll up our sleeves and prepare for my son's upcoming building project. Let's make it easier on him. And they build and they prepare for the building of the temple. So they're hewing stones, and they're cutting timber and doing whatever they have to do to it to make boards and planks and all those things. It's out of my area of expertise by about 38,000 miles, but all of that takes time. So the preparations last about 3 years. And so if I'm right, and again, this number can change. I'm fine if this changes a little bit. Maybe it's 98, maybe it's 97, but probably it's about 979. So that's about 7 years to build the dynastic palace. If you compare that to Solomon's dynastic palace and the temple building, how long it took them, that's a conservative number. Conservative. It could be longer. So I think it fits pretty well.
And Solomon is at what point?
At 971.
971.
So right here, or inside of here. Right in here. Or here if you prefer. So here's the text in 2 Samuel 7, 1-2. Now it happened when the king had stayed in his house, and he goes on existing, had given him rest all around from his enemies, that the king said to Nathan the prophet, "Look now, I am residing in a house of cedar, but the ark of God is residing in the midst of the tent." Curtains. The first two events mentioned here are David staying in his house and God's giving David rest from all his enemies. David's house here is not the final Davidic palace. David's house. And the rest mentioned is not David's final rest. This is an initial house and an initial rest. Crazy as that sounds, it is what it is. The cedar house here is one that David confiscated, or more likely had built in Jerusalem after the Israelites overtook the city. So after 1002 BC. This initial rest came after David's victory over the Jebusites at Jerusalem. Again, in 1002, and his earlier Philistine war. So that first Philistine war lasts from sometime in 1001 until 1000 BC. It's a short one. And God provided a temporary rest in order to free up David to receive the Davidic covenant from him in peace. Now, here's a blurb from Todd Boland. Remember I told you this guy wrote this journal article on three things. The timing of three things, three events. One, the moving of the ark into Jerusalem. Two, the receiving of the Davidic covenant. David receives it from God. And three, the building of his dynastic palace. And Todd Boland gets it right on two of the three, and he gets it wrong on the third. So he wants to tie the building of the dynastic palace to the early events of 1001 and 1000, right? Soon after David takes over Jerusalem. But, there are all kinds of glaring problems that he doesn't even deal with, by the way, because that's like an afterthought. That third element is afterthought in his journal article. He really focuses on the first two. And he throws the third in there for good measure, because it shows up early in 2 Samuel. But remember, it's in that parenthetical. That's the key. And number one problem for him is he doesn't see that as parenthetical. So when I wrote my article, I sent it to him for his suggested revisions, and he was fighting and kicking like an angry child. Not that he was a child. He wasn't a child. But like a child would, he fought against it with really weak argumentation. Because he's not ready to surrender yet. He doesn't want to give up the ghost. He wants to fight for what he has in the article. But he's wrong. Love him to death. He's a dear brother. And I have great respect for him. And he's right about a lot of things. But he's wrong about this one. But here's what he says. Again, there's a lot of right in his article. 2/3 of it, or more, if you're talking about space, more than 2/3, is correct. So he says, a better view is that this rest of 2 Samuel 7:1 is relative to the context. And it is intended here to mean that David enjoyed a time of peace. And this is a scholar. In Tsumura's words, this rest, quote, could refer to a temporary warless situation, not necessarily complete victory over all his enemies, end quote. David had rest in the sense that he was no longer defending Israel's tribes from foreign invasions. He had removed the Philistine threat from Israel's heartland. Later, he would venture out to expand his holdings and tributaries, a distinct status that does not negate the rest described here. The text supports this interpretation in two ways. First, in 2 Samuel 7:11, the Lord promises that he will give David rest from his enemies. This indicates that the rest of verse 1 is not a final rest. Do you get that? If he's in a final rest in verse 1, and then God later in verse 11 says, oh, by the way, I'm going to give you rest. It's like, okay, do we just cut out verse 1 so it makes sense with verse 11? No, it's two rests, not one. This is a temporary rest, that is a permanent rest. Second, 2 Samuel 8:1, and this is really important, and all scholars that I know agree on this. It records, and so this is afterward, right? Chapter 8. We're in 7, right? We're in 7. In 8, at the beginning, it says, after this. Strong Hebrew word. So clearly we have a chronological break. Now something else is going on. After this, David fought the Philistines and others. Wait a minute. If the real rest of David is already there and being experienced, 7:1, then how can David be fighting these wars? It's contradictory. Not if you see that there are two rests. A short temporary one and a later permanent one. So that David could kind of kick back in his palace at the end. After building it, of course, right? So, the author clearly had no difficulty reconciling the rest that David enjoyed in chapter 7 with the battles that David would later wage in the territories of his neighbors. So I agree with everything that Bolin says here. He's spot on. All right, now let's look at that later rest described. Verse 11. Why do I say that? Should be verse 11 and maybe just 11. Maybe that's just 11. Probably that's just 11. So, and I forgot to cut something out. When you copy and paste, that's the problem. You don't always correct things according to where you've pasted to, where you're writing something different. Verse 11, now I will give you rest from all of your enemies. And he goes on existing, has declared to you that he goes on existing will make a house for you. Right? So this is part of that Davidic covenant, and it is referring to a future rest and a house that God's going to build for you. Now, does that mean we don't need Hiram? God's going to build the house for David? The palace. Did I say palace? No. What's it talking about? Lineage. Yeah, that kind of house. That's the real house. Because people are forever, aren't we? But the building is not. So that's the important thing. The people. If God already had given David rest, 7:1, then the forward-looking rest of 2 Samuel 7:11 must be a different and thus final rest, with intervening wars. David's earlier Philistine war was the first in a series of wars that preoccupied him for roughly 2 decades, as the nations around Israel were intent on holding his kingdom at bay. His Ammonite war began in 998, while his army's siege and conquest of Rabbah occurred from 997 to 996. The Philistine destruction of Dual Gates in about 990 BC probably initiated David's later Philistine war. Why? Think about this. David's out on campaign. He's who knows where. Syria, really far away or somewhere. And the Philistines, they're getting anxious, right? And David hasn't been around for a while. David's been on campaign. So they say, this is our opportunity. The cat's away so the mice can play. Here we go. And so what do? They go up the Elah Valley, and what's the first thing they come in contact with? Dual Gates. And Dual Gates is a small outpost, right? And probably the Philistines have gathered all of the armies of all of the Pentapolis, and maybe even more. So they have a huge army this time, probably way bigger than when David fought Goliath. Huge army, and they come up the Elah Valley. You can probably hear them stomping as they come, right? Miles away. And can you imagine the shaking in the boots of the Israelites, the Judites, who were in that outpost? So what did they do? Well, the archaeology tells us, I didn't tell you this before, the archaeology tells us that they got out of Dodge pretty much about as fast as they could. But what they did is they took their valuable things and they dug down in the dirt and buried them within the fortress and put the dirt back on top, kind of smoothed it over, and fled out the other gate. Well, by the time the Philistines arrived, they were already up the Elah Valley far enough that they could just kind of keep moving along at a pace and stay ahead of them and get to safety. But the Philistines, they decided, or at least some of them, some of the army, they decided, we're going to take this outpost out so it can never harm us again. So they destroy it. There's clear evidence of destruction. And again, the archaeologists tell us it can't be more than 30 years after it was built. It's all quick, boom, 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 and it's over. 3 decades or less. So that's what archaeology shows us. And timing-wise, all of the evidence is pointing to right around this 990 area, and even the radiocarbon evidence, the central point of the range, and there's always a range, it's not 1 year, one specific year, but the central point of the range is like 988. It's that close. The central part of that range. So my suggested 990, I think, is right about there. And it makes better sense a couple years earlier with other things. So it fits, though. It fits perfectly within that range. So probably that destruction of dual gates by the Philistines in around 990 initiated David's later Philistine war. So David's off somewhere else. The Philistines capture that city. Probably they do some bad things in Judah or the vicinity after they take out dual gates. And David eventually comes down, and maybe he even has messengers sent to tell him about the takeover. So eventually and again, I'm just piecing together the parts. It's not in the text of the Bible, but he eventually came back from whatever that campaign he was on, and he said, the Philistines were back at it. Yes, let's go after them. So it's recorded in 2 Samuel that David's forces, take out the Philistines, and that he comes to this point of the promised rest of God. So the Philistines, like all the others, are pushed back or eliminated altogether, however that works. But there are surviving Philistines, so we know that David didn't destroy the whole race. They go on into the next several centuries. But he gains victory over them. That's the key. So David's wars against them, the Moabites, Edomites, Ammonites, Philistines, Amalekites, Arameans, and Syrians, concluded around 980 BC when he obtained this promised rest from all of his enemies. All right, let's talk about David's houses. And I think we have attestation for the building of David's houses from 1002 to 972 BC, which is what, 30 years? There's 30 years of David's constructing of homes, around 30 years. The earliest it could be is when Jerusalem is captured in 1002. The latest is probably the year before Solomon comes onto the throne. So, the houses of King David. After overtaking Jebusite Jerusalem, so now we're going back in time. We were just talking about 990 or so, the second Philistine wars. Now let's go back to the first Philistine wars. Early, after taking Jebusite Jerusalem, 1002, David built multiple houses within the city. And I'm suggesting somewhere between 1002 and 999. Those are rough years. You say, well, why, Dr. P? Why are you convinced about this? 1 Chronicles 15:1. David built, and this is plural in Hebrew, David built houses for himself. And this is an important word in Hebrew. It's a preposition within the city of David. Remember we saw the map before? We have that southeastern spur. It was walled. It's a walled city. That's why David had to send somebody through and we didn't even talk about this, we didn't have time, through the water shaft, right? He had to send somebody to go into the city to unlock the doors to let all the people in so that they could take them out, right? So it's a walled city. But David built multiple houses within the city. Again, if he first builds the dynastic palace, he has zero need to build houses within Jerusalem. Zero. He's got his dynastic palace. David built houses for himself, yes, within the city of David. That is, within Jerusalem's city walls. The Philistines ascended into Israel to kill David. And I've got that at 1001 BC. I'm pretty confident about that date. likely heading eastward up the Ajalon Valley Pass. When he heard of it, he, quote, went out toward them, then returned to safety within Jerusalem. Quote, and that's 1 Chronicles, then 2 Samuel, quote, all of the Philistines ascended in order to search for David. When David heard of their coming, then he descended into the stronghold. Now, think about that for a minute. That's a mind twister. Two different texts say two different things. When David heard of it, he went out toward them. He did. When he heard of their coming, then he descended into the stronghold. Okay? This, liberals will jump all over this. Look how silly the text is. Either there's a contradiction here, or we're missing something. And what I try to explain in my article, and again, I'm not going to go into the details probably. I don't think it's in a future slide here, but maybe it is. The point is, this can only be true if they're done in succession rather than simultaneously. So what David evidently did first, let's see, do I talk about this? No, maybe not. What David did first, he had to do this one first. He went out toward them. Because this action, descending into the stronghold, that's two kids fighting, and one kid runs into his house and locks the door, and the other kid can't get in, right? So that's the final step. So this has to be the first step. What does that mean? Toward them. It doesn't mean, and I don't know what your English Bible says in this verse. Probably it's worded differently. Maybe it's worded differently. I chose a reading that I think fits better and is totally faithful to the Hebrew here. They went out toward them. That doesn't mean that they fought with them. Don't think that. It doesn't mean they fought with them. Because if they went out to fight them, then there's no way in succession David is going to descend into the stronghold. Right? It doesn't make any sense. Either you're fighting or you're running from the fight. So he went out toward them. What did he do? If you go to the northeast of Jerusalem, there's the highest point in Cisjordan. It's called Nabi Samuel. Nabi Samuel. You know what that means? It means Samuel the prophet. And that point is, and I was on it once years ago when it was legal to go up there. I don't know if it's legal anymore. It's an Israeli military sensitive spot, right? So they're kind of a little bit protective about Nabi Samuel. So, but anyway, you go up there and you can see in all directions, all around. It's the coolest thing. That's probably where David went. Because that was closer to where the Philistines were coming up the Ajalon Pass to get onto the central mountain spine to be able to go down toward Jerusalem. Right? So it fits perfectly. So what did David go up there for? A game of two words, I spy. I spy a Philistine. I spy another Philistine. I spy a lot of dust from the Philistines, right? So here they're coming, and what does it give David the opportunity to do? To scout out the enemy, to know what he's up against. He looks. He sees lots of dust, lots of Philistines, lots of enemies, lots of swords. And what does he do?
Let's go back in the wall.
Let's go back inside the city. So he goes back to Jerusalem, here it is, and he descends into the stronghold. Why the term stronghold? They could have said city of David. They could have said Jerusalem. It said into the stronghold. The place that's impenetrable, except for crazy stunts like when David overtook the city, right? Which probably he blocked up or made difficult to find again.
Wouldn't that like be the wall within the wall? The southern spur was wall, but then you had the wall around all of Jerusalem.
No, that was all of Jerusalem at the time.
Okay.
There was one wall. And I think I'll have a picture at some point to show you, I'm pretty sure. So, notice that 2 Samuel 5:17 speaks of no house and no palace. Now it's the view of the excavator who excavated David's palace, Elat Mazar, deceased now, wonderful Israeli archaeologist, who is willing to say there's truth, historical truth in the Bible. So bless her heart. She stood up for that, and she received a lot of flack from other scholars for this. She thinks that 2 Samuel 5:17 is saying as soon as David saw the Philistines coming, David left his dynastic palace and descended went downhill into the city of David. Does that make sense? The old Jebusite city, because it's downhill. Now, just from those words in that verse, she could be right. But looking at the greater picture, she's wrong. And she's got the wrong dating. So she found the right place for the wrong reason. She did find what she was looking for, the palace of David, but not because of this verse, because of other things in other verses. All right? And we're not going to get into everything. We'll get into a little bit. When David completed his foreign conquests and received the rest from his enemies that God had promised him in the spring of 1000 BC, he built, and that's 979 to 972 BC, he built the dynastic palace that his successors continued to use until 587. Hiram sent, so this is 2 Samuel 5:11, Hiram sent cedar trees, carpenters, and stonemasons of the walls. So they built a palace for David. That's the big, grand, dynastic palace. That's the one Elot and Mazar found. But again, David didn't descend from it into Jerusalem. David went out to look at the Philistines, probably from Nabi Samuel, because they were close by, and that's the big outlook point. And then he said, uh-oh, that's too many to fight. Let's go back in Jerusalem. And what does he do once he gets to Jerusalem, by the way? Anyone remember from the text? Not that we looked at it, but...
I do. He inquired of the Lord to see if...
Bingo. He gets on the phone, and he rings up God and says, Lord, we need a little bit of help here. What do you recommend? Right? That's basically what happens. So, yeah, that's the way it should be seen. So, what's the chronology of David's houses? 1002 to 999. Initial houses are built within Jerusalem. And remember, the text says that expressly in Chronicles, that those houses were built within Jerusalem. What does that mean? Within the city walls. The palace was built outside, the dynastic palace, outside the city wall. Now, what king would ever, and I agree, I acknowledge that you don't all have degrees in ancient Near Eastern history and archaeology. But the question I would ask, if you would, I would ask, what king would be idiotic enough to build his dynastic palace that would take years to build outside the city wall? You'd have to be really dumb. Mm-hmm. So if David just got onto the throne, he's the new guy in town, just took over Israel, just captured Jerusalem. He doesn't have anything close to rest from his enemies, does he? They're going to be attacking him all over the place. So would he ever build his dynastic palace at that time? Would he ever build it outside the city walls? Zero chance for me, okay, having studied my PhD and MA in this. 0% chance that he would build his house there then. None. But when is it safe for him to build the dynastic palace outside the city wall?
Rest.
When he has his final rest. He's conquered all of his enemies. There's nobody within shouting distance who's going to bother him in the least. It's clear sailing. And probably he already has it in the plan to tell Solomon to then build, once you build the temple, right, you can enclose my palace, and Solomon built his own palace, by the way. And you can build your palace, and you can build the temple. And then, Solomon, buddy, be smart, extend the wall around all of it. So that's what we're going to look at in the next hour. That Solomon built that wall extension to enclose everything. So it was built with a plan. Okay, it was built at a vulnerable moment when it wasn't really vulnerable because he had no enemies around him who could bother him. But the plan was for it to be enclosed in the wall. It's just that he wouldn't do it. But because of all of his conquests, it was safe to build it, safe to prepare for the building of the temple. let Solomon build that, and simultaneously Solomon would build the wall around Jerusalem, which he did. And we're going to see evidence of that.
When David expanded the kingdom, did he build like forts around, defensive forts around the kingdom that he expanded? And do we have any
We don't have any evidence of that, and I would suggest we won't find it.
Oh.
Now, could I be wrong? 100%. But I don't think we'll find it. Why? Charlemagne. That's why. He's out on conquest all the time. He's not focusing on that. It's like if you're into the Roman Empire. Trajan versus Hadrian. Trajan's going all over the creation to expand the empire, right? He conquers Dacia. They've been wanting to conquer Dacia forever. He finally conquers Dacia. And he conquers elsewhere. And Hadrian comes behind him, and Hadrian does, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember studying any. So if I'm not wrong, Hadrian does zero expansion. But what does he do? Consolidation. That's what he does. Let's now put a fence around all that we conquered under my predecessor.
And that's going to come later.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Solomon, in that scenario, is Hadrian. David is Trajan. If you're into the Roman thing, right? It's fun stuff. All right, so that's the initial houses. 1001, he's forced into Jerusalem by the Philistines. That's what we looked at, right? That initial attack as they're coming up against him, looking for David. They heard that David, I didn't tell you this, but they heard, you may know this from the text. They heard that David had been elevated over all of Israel. And they were afraid of David. Because this is a guy, he's got charisma, he's got talent, he's got loyalty of his people. Let's take this guy out.
So you take him out before you can build an army.
Right. And do any conquering. So that was the plan. Well,
That didn't work.
that didn't work. Then God showed up. 1001, also, the Ark of the Covenant goes into Jerusalem. And that's afterward, right? So same year, but this is after. 1000, God promises an enduring house. That's the Davidic covenant. All of the wars that go on that we're not really getting into, and I cut it all out of the slideshows because I knew we wouldn't have time for it. 980 BC, all that's done. David has a rest from his enemies. Again, an approximate number. 979 to 972, my suggested, not hard and fast, but my suggested numbers for the years of construction of the Davidic palace. And then 971, Solomon is crowned as co-regent. All right, so this is, I guess I do have this. Alat Mazar said, this is what she says. And again, I'm saying she's wrong. So one of us is right, one of us is wrong. No doubt about it. The location of the palace is hinted at in verse, and it's 2 Samuel 5, 17, where she quotes, the Philistines marched up in search of David, but David heard of it, and he went down to the stronghold. And so she says, it appears as though David was residing in his new palace at the time of the Philistine attack, and thus was forced to leave the palace and go down to the fortress, where he would have felt more protected. It follows that the city fortress stood on a spot at a lower elevation than the palace. So again, I think she's wrong, good intentions, but I don't think she studied the bottom line. I don't think she studied the details, the nuances in the text carefully enough to piece everything together perfectly to understand this. But praise the Lord, even though she had the wrong reasons for looking for the palace where she did look, she found it there anyway. Outside the city walls. So, here's a good picture for you. All right, see the red dotted line here? This is the city wall, the projection of the city wall. And at certain places, you know, we have actual wall that undergirds this. But the suggestion is that the city wall all went around like this. Okay? So.
This is the early one.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is Jebusite
Okay.
Jerusalem, if you will. If you prefer the city of David. So, and remember, we're looking, well, this isn't east-oriented, this is west-oriented. So that's west, east, north, south. Okay? So, my arrow points to and says Davidic palace. And I would even say dynastic palace, right? Here is what Mazar excavated. Now, in the ancient world, okay, remember, we have what I talked about before. We have robbing out. New people come along, rob out and use. So we don't have every stone, even of the perimeter of the building. But we have huge chunks. All of this, all of this. And by the way, if I forget to tell you, if it's not in the slide, I want to tell you now. This area here, this is known as the stepped stone structure today. I'm convinced, and others are convinced with me, not everyone, but others, plenty of others are convinced with me, that this is the biblical, so it's a Hebrew word that's transliterated into English, which remember, that's the terrible thing to do to people. Put it in English. The Milo, where David rebuilt it, Solomon rebuilt it, Hezekiah rebuilt it. What does that tell you about the Milo? It's always breaking down, right? That's what it's telling you. It's always breaking down. Why? It's a glacis. It's a steep slope that's kind of, mankind is helping the slope for it to be more difficult for attackers to come against you. Right? And usually they plaster it when they finish the building with stones. They plaster the thing. So it's more difficult to get to them with that glacis. But it's built on a slope all the time. You automatically have gravity, inertia, people walking over it, human damage, that kind of thing. So it's always becoming broken down and it needs to be rebuilt up all the time. So this area had to be, fortified with a glacis. And here's the point I was coming to. What Mazar excavated here, she connected it to this glacis, the top part of the glacis. And she said, we discovered that it's beyond doubt, archaeologically, it's required to agree, what's the word I'm looking for? To confirm that this large stone structure, that's what she first called it, the large stone structure, as opposed to the stepped stone structure, that they were built in harmony with one another. At least if this was built in phases, the glacis, the final phase, a massive phase of it was built in conjunction with the building of the large stone structure. So they're built in the same time frame. And that tells us a lot. Okay, so hold that thought. 2 Samuel 5:17, David's response to the Philistine incursion. Then he descended into the stronghold, then he went out toward them. So, we talked about that. And this is the Philistine march, right? So the Philistines probably gathered at Gath, which is right here. So from the other cities in the plain, they probably gathered here at Gath. And to stay away from tipping themselves off to the Israelites, instead of going up the Elah Valley, they probably went north. And on the way, they picked up more soldiers from here. And probably went up the Ajalon Valley, because the place that the Bible clearly tells us that they came out at is the Valley of Rephaim. So clearly it has to be up the Ajalon Pass that they go up onto the central mountain spine. No doubt about it. The Philistines probably gathered at Gath, at least for the ones located to the south of Gath, then traveled northward on the Great Trunk Road. So, where's the Great Trunk Road? It's this. It comes from Egypt, where it's, if you remember 3 years ago, it's in Egypt called the Way of Horus, the Road of Horus. Horus is the king of the gods, the falcon god. And it automatically, as you cross the border, it becomes what we call, whatever the Israelites called it, but maybe, God called it the Way of the Philistines, but we call it the Great Trunk Road. So it comes up from Egypt, and it goes like this, right? That's the Great Trunk Road. And then they take a right, 90-degree turn, up, and they go more steeply upward to the east, and go up the Ajalon Pass, and end up on the Central Mountain Spine. So, you can see this movement, right? That the Philistines are on the plain. They have to go through the Shvelah. They have to come up the Central Mountain, up and onto the Central Mountain Spine to be able to get David at Jerusalem. Okay, here's just a quick glimpse of the Beit Horon Ridge. This is the course that the Philistines almost certainly traveled to get up. I'm sorry, Beit Horon. No, this is south. This is the pass to get onto the Central Mountain Spine. That's south of the Ajalon Pass, the Beit Horon Pass. But it's looking from the place that I'm suggesting to you is where David was, where David went to when he first wanted to check out the Philistines, right? Like the text says. Where did he go? To the top of Nabi Samuel. So this view, the picture is taken from that position, that overlooking position on Nabi Samuel. So he's looking out all throughout here, and over to the right, maybe even off the screen, he sees them coming up the Ajalon Pass onto the into the valley of Rephaim. Right? So David is right about somewhere like this. Nabi Samuel. Maybe I have it on here. Oh, here it is. There's Nabi Samuel. Okay, there's Nabi Samuel. So David is in Jerusalem. Where does he go? Up. Let's go to that high place. So he goes to Nabi Samuel. He's here. The Philistines, folks, are coming right up here. This is on a straight line to where they are. That's not only the highest point in Cisjordan, that's the most strategic point for looking right where they're coming from, isn't it? You're looking right into them as they walk toward you. So it makes perfect sense that Nabi Samuel is where David went to when he went toward the Philistines. And guess what? That is toward, isn't it? Because he was here, they're coming up here, and if he goes to here, he's going toward them to be able to see them face to face. Doesn't fight them, checks them out, comes back into Jerusalem, begs the Lord for help, and the Lord answers. Tells him what to do. All right, I'm going to skip all of this because I pretty much pointed it out to you. Let's see, is there anything finally I'll say here? Okay, let me just jump to the end. So as David retreated into Jerusalem from a strategically high position, such as Nabi Samuel, the Philistines marched into the valley of Rephaim in their quest to find him. After David's inquiry about whether or not to attack them, God informed the king that he would deliver the Philistines into David's hand. The Israelites won a resounding victory, just as God had indicated in the past. But first, David needed to go to Jerusalem and consult God. The result of the study of David's earlier Philistine war is that no house is mentioned or implied in 2 Samuel 5:17. Again, in disagreement with Elat Mazar the excavator, contra her confident claim. This text does not support any Davidic house located outside of Jerusalem this early. So summary statement, 979 to 972, that's the construction of the Davidic palace. Now David, this is 5:9 and 5:11. Now David lived within the stronghold, so he called it the city of David. Then David built all around from the glacis and over to the palace. Right? Okay, now notice my translation. It's going to be different than yours. Definitely will be different. So David lived within the stronghold. Yeah, we know that. He called the stronghold, the city of David. We know that. Here it is. Then David built all around from the glacis and over to the palace. Your text probably says inward, right?
Yeah.
That can't work here. You need an object from one place to the other place. And it says in the same passage that, in Chronicles, parallel passage in Chronicles, it says well, in so many, not in so many terms, but not literally, but what it comes to say is that, Joab built the city, and David built outward from it, right? Around it. That's what it says. That's the word I was looking for. Around it. David built around it. Joab built the city. He did the reconstruction inside the city. That's Jebusite Jerusalem. David built around it, which means outside of the city. Right? David built outside of the city. And what does it say here? David built all around from the glacis and over to the palace. Remember what Eilat Mazar found out? That when they looked and they did the archaeological digging, they found out that the construction of the Milo, the glacis, was done at the same time as the Palace of David, the dynastic palace that was outside the city wall, right? And did I even point this out to you, as I should have? Shame on me if I didn't. This and this are both outside the city wall. You notice that? Yeah. Right? Sorry. So, David built around from the glacis and over to the palace. That's describing what Mazar found. That he did that building, that construction right there. Now, why? So David is building outside the city, and outside the city he's building from the glacis to, and then there's the word bayit, which means house. To the house. But it doesn't say that in your text. House is the predominant. That's the root meaning of the word, the house. David built from the glacis to the house. Now, most translations put the word inward there because it doesn't make sense to them if that's the palace. But it is the palace. It's just that we're within the parentheses. It's, this is like a soliloquy, right? If you're at a performance, a play. Everything stops. All the people stop. One person, it goes all dark except for a spotlight on one person and one person talks. That's a soliloquy. That's what's going on. So they built from the glacis and over to the palace. So in that parenthetical, they're mentioning the palace, the dynastic palace that's built late in his reign, right? Before it's even described here as having been built with the help of Hiram. And again, it didn't make sense to the modern translators in English Bibles because, the temple of the palace of David is only made here, right there. Built a palace for David in verse 11. So for them it can't be palace, but it's got to be a place. David built around from point A to point B. Inward doesn't work. Inward what? David didn't do the building inside the city. Joab did. Does that make sense? See how this fits? Fits like a glove. So, it's an early reference to the palace before ever talking about the construction of the palace. Why would they do that? Because, remember, it's like playing a game where you have a safe spot, right? You're playing tag. If there's a safe spot, nobody can get you there. This is a safe spot. This is inside the parentheses. You can say whatever you want. So, when is this written and by whom it is written? Nathan and Gad. When did they write it? A couple of decades, a decade or two after the building was built. So it was already built, it was sitting there. They know that there's a connection between the glacis that slopes and the construction. They know of the palace. They know that David built it. So they're giving a quick statement that David is the one responsible for all of that building. Now he's going to go back and tell us about the construction of that building that he just referred to in verse 11. Now Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David along with cedar trees, carpenters, and stonemasons of walls. So they built a palace for David. This palace, folks, is that palace. No matter what your translators tell me, it is. It's the same thing. That's the palace. Built after 980 BC when Hiram gets on the throne. For Gad and Nathan, it's a done deal. The palace is already there. So in their free spot, right, in their safe zone, they're able to talk as much as they want about these things because they're not in the sequential flow of events. They've removed themselves from that with this parenthetical. There it is. So, the section of text from 2 Samuel 5:9 to 16 is a summary of David's activity in Jerusalem throughout the reign from Jerusalem, which fits with the flow of the entire chapter, as this represents a paradigm shift from ruling only Judah from Hebron versus ruling all of Israel from Jerusalem. As such, the authors intended to let their readers know some big picture events from 35,000 feet, that's for perspective, before parachuting down into the forest with them to cover some finer details. Moses did the very same thing in the book of Genesis. So again, that's an explanation, that's a description of the parenthetical. It's 35,000 feet. We're just hitting the really high points, and then we're going to go back over it, parachute down, and talk about the details. Some of them. All right, so I basically explained all of that to you already. Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and supplied him with cedars of Lebanon, carpenters to craft the wood, and stonemasons to handle the hewn stone that would comprise the walls of the palace. God granted David favor with this young king. Ancient records show that Hiram's reign began in Tishri of 980 BC, which equates to about 22 years after David conquered Jerusalem. So if you're not going to just like Todd Boland did, kind of, and he did this in his article, he tried to what's the word? Not humiliate, but he tried to tear down, can't think of the word, he tried to tear down all of the chronological demands of the historical sources that point to us that 980 has to be the year Hiram gets on the throne. He had to do that to protect his view.
Yeah.
But it was a faulty view in the beginning. So, the reason this event is described so soon after the history of David's conquest of Jerusalem is that it stands out as a major event in his reign, and thus worthy of immediate mention in the summary. David's palace probably was built from 979 to 72. Therefore, these Tyrians built, or helped build if you prefer, David's palace, but only after his foreign wars were completed. Given that the new king of Tyre saw David's might, he figured that making an alliance with Israel's king was a strategic win, as David already had defeated many peoples by then. The parallel passage in Chronicles presents a virtually verbatim account of the text in 2 Samuel, and it adds a bit more. Ezra also states that because God highly exalted David's kingdom, the king knew that God had established him as king over Israel. David saw this exaltation not as an act of his own genius or ability, but God's doing alone. While Nebuchadnezzar II's later kingdom was exalted highly, that king took all of the credit for himself rather than giving it to God. So what did God do? He humbled him mightily, causing him to run around the ground, eating like animals do, and drinking from the dew. David was different. So, modern excavations of the palace. Okay, the statement in 2 Samuel 7 that David was living in his house of cedar does not have to be his final house. Doesn't even have to be his final house made of cedar. So just because it says cedar in 7:1 doesn't mean that's his dynastic palace. That includes cedar wood. Doesn't mean that.
It just means he confiscated the best house.
If it's already a house already built. If not, it became the best house as soon as he had it built.
I think the word cedar in there is trying to denote that he took the best house that he could get at the time.
Or that at least that he had the good materials once it was built. Yeah. But it does not have to be the cedar palace that Hiram built. It doesn't have to be. There's a lot of cedar. After all, the Philistine attack on David in 2 Samuel 5:17 took place soon after David conquered Jerusalem, so he had to be living inside of a house within the city. Right? It had to be within the city, inside the city walls. That's where it says. Possibly of great importance, 1 Chronicles 15:1 states that David built plural houses for himself in the city of David, which implies that these houses were located within the city limits. David had plenty of houses, and thus the house of 7:1 need not be his final palace of later fame, which Hiram helped him to build. So as for David's final palace, which Hiram's craftsmen helped him to design and build, undoubtedly with the aid of slaves whom David had acquired during his conquest, archaeology has revealed its impressive remnants. So it's there in the city of David, the spur. Mazar's book, that's her book, 2011, published in Jerusalem. There's where it is, the arrow pointing to it. Here is that glacis, the stepped stone structure. Here are walls of the building, right? And they're massive walls. Now, ceramics tells us that the large stone structure in connection with the glacis indicates a construction date at the earliest in an advanced phase of the Iron Age 1, or at the latest at the beginning of the Iron Age 2A. And Mazar says, a date around 1000 BC seems appropriate. She found underneath the walls of the building, she found pottery from the 12th and 11th centuries, which means the building had to be built in the 11th century or the 10th century. No other choice. Therefore, the archaeologist's evidence from the field contradicts the critical scholar. Mazar's date of about 1000 BC for the building of the palace is appropriate, since David's conquest dates to 1002 BC, according to proper chronology. Technically, the palace's construction dates to, I think, 979 to 72. Once again, biblical history and archaeology are proven to coexist peacefully when studied carefully and properly. So, these are all, okay. The final use of the structure, right, is known from bullae that were tossed out of the probably windows in the house and were found in the ground right outside that palace. And, oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, this wall in thickness, that's around, I think the number is 6 meters in width. What's 6 meters in feet? Or y'all?
Like 18 feet.
Is it 18? Yeah, 18, yeah, 18, 19 feet in thickness. That wall right there. What else could it be? It's monumental architecture. This isn't a fountain somebody built. This is a real massive building. So she found these objects. They're 2 bullae bearing the names of officials in Hezekiah's court. Do I even name them here? Yeah, here they are. Here are the bullae. Yehuakal, son of Shemaliyahu, that's Jeremiah 31:3 and 38:1. The other one, Gedaliahu, son of Pashur, Jeremiah 38:1. And one of them, it mentions one or the other. It mentions the father. In the Bible, it doesn't even mention the father, just the official. So the bulla is even more specific than the Bible. So this tells us, and again, they're from the reign of Zedekiah. When does he reign? 597 to 587, at the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. That's what it dates to. So this building, this massive building, is used all the way down until the Judite kingdom dies. All the way down. And these are officials of the king, so the building has to be a royal building. It's connected. Does that make sense? There they are. How do we know that David's palace survived this long? Good question. Nehemiah 12:37. At the fountain gate, they went directly up the steps of the city of David by the stairway of the wall above the palace of David to the water gate on the east. Now, was the palace intact when Nehemiah in the 5th century BC is describing this? Long gone. There's no more smoke. May not even be charred remains, I don't know. But it's remnants of walls. But we know that's David's palace. There it is, described here. It's still at least part of it intact after they return, the Judites return from captivity. Pretty cool, right? So it confirms what the archaeology suggests. So that, folks, is David's palace built outside the city wall, later enclosed by Solomon, during or after, whatever, the time that he built the temple and his own palace. there you have it. All right, questions as I look to see where we're at? 343.
Easy question.
Okay.
How long of a hike would it have been then for David and his team to go look out at Samuel's high point up there?
How long of a
So
hike?
he has, are we talking hours? Are we talking a couple of days out there to look? No.
We're talking hours.
Slowly? Hours.
Probably 4 hours, something like that. 5 hours, in that range, I give it. And that's something you do in the morning. You get up there, you see, you figure out what you need to figure out. You go back, and you're back home before nightfall. But there are the Philistines on the way. David probably heard advance word. Probably a sentry came to him and told him, hey, we've got a problem brewing. There's a lot of dust cloud and people down there coming up. And David says, well, I've got to see it for myself. Anybody else?
How do we know it's David's?
How do we know it's David's palace? Okay, there's no smoking gun that says, I am David's palace. So it's officially less than 100%. But it's taking all of the circumstantial evidence that I've gone over with you, adding it together, and there's a couple other things I haven't even said that bring us to that. And this is part of it. Okay, the archaeology shows it's still intact, even if in fragmentary form, after the return. And the Bulai tell us that it was being used all the way until that time. So what other building, and the other thing is the proximity of it to the city wall, the northern extremity of the city wall, right? Shows us that this is right outside of Jebusite Jerusalem that he captured. It's the right place for David to build a palace, right outside, right opposite the wall. And and a bunch of other things.
We just saw Dinesh D'Souza's Dragon's Prophecy film, in which he spent a good third of the film on the archaeological evidence. And he made a very big deal about, so you had a picture of it, about that carved Phoenician capital from the top of one of the,
The Proto-Ionian capital.
Style.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Proto-Ionian capital.
Yes,
This
that
guy.
one right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is Aegean. That's Aegean.
That's right.
From Greeks, the Greek-speaking people.
Yeah, so what, Hiram outsourced that one to bring it in? Or?
Yep. Well, at least the design.
Yeah.
It could be.
Because he's
It
building
could be
all these
locally
temples
built.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's pottery, they can bring original stuff, but something this big and heavy, they can manufacture it locally. Just make drawings of the real stuff while you're over there. Bring those drawings from the Aegean and then reproduce it. Here's another reason why we know it's David's palace. This is a reconstruction of the palace. It's modeled after the plan of the palace, the royal palace at Megiddo, that's contemporaneous with it, with this large stone structure, right? So it fits, period-wise, it fits perfectly with another royal palace at Megiddo. Or if you want to call it a royal structure, whatever you want. All right, let's take